Welcome to another video featuring the world's worst parents, where we witness lessons on how not to raise your children. If you have a story to share, send it to this email, and your story may appear in a future video. Part 1. I am a single man in my 30s. I have a 29-year-old brother who already has 4 children. He had his first child at 22 years old, followed by the second one a year later, and the third 2 years after that. The fourth child, the most recent addition, was born just a few months ago. My sister-in-law, his wife, and I don't get along. She always enjoys trying to irritate me by acting superior and turning into a drama queen who plays the victim. No matter how I retaliate against her, she manages to burst into tears out of nowhere and puts on an extremely convincing show to gain sympathy from almost anyone. My parents and my brother absolutely adore her, even though they know exactly who she truly is and simply don't care. I admit she is attractive, but she is so terrible that I could never be attracted to her. She also refuses to get any kind of job, despite having a university degree, and my mother willingly helps with the children all day long. As a result, their finances depend entirely on my brother, and it means they can't live anywhere else but in my house. Parents and privacy became a problem with all of us living under the same roof in a 3-bedroom house built in the 60s. As we were growing up, it was evident that my younger brother was the obvious favorite. Despite being just 3 years apart in age, he developed a superiority complex because I was treated severely differently. It was clear that my parents cared much more about him, as he always received the lion's share of everything unless someone called them out on it, which happened quite often as our relatives noticed. That's why my parents packed our bags, and we moved approximately 250 kilometers away from them. We would usually only see them during holidays since it was a 3-hour drive. Unfortunately, my brother became physically abusive towards me on multiple occasions, even causing my first girlfriend to break up with me. He would laugh at any misfortune I faced, and my parents would simply tell me to swallow my tears whenever I got angry about it. I only received equal treatment when my parents wanted to maintain appearances. I must admit, it was quite amusing to see the look on his face whenever they had to treat me the same as my brother on birthdays and Christmas, solely because other people were present. We had relatives who were very intrusive and loved gossiping, so my parents did everything they could to hide what was really going on. They even threatened to take away all my belongings if I didn't keep my mouth shut when things got too messy. This only made my parents celebrate even more when I turned 18 and moved out because it meant they no longer had to support me. I hadn't even finished high school yet when I left, but jumping from house to house was much better than living with them. I had little contact with them since I left home. They didn't even attend my high school graduation, but I didn't really care. From then on, it was usually just me, my parents, and my brother during the holidays, along with the rest of the family. The early 2020 pandemic wasn't kind to me. I lost my job and couldn't renew the lease for my condo because my roommate also lost their job. Neither of us could afford the place anymore. It was a 2-bedroom rented apartment that I quite liked. As the lease was ending, my roommate left early to move back in with their parents, and I had to sell almost all of my belongings because I would soon be homeless if I didn't make extreme cuts to my expenses. I really shouldn't have rented such an expensive place, but I enjoyed living a high standard of living until life wasn't kind to me, and I realized I should be living somewhere much cheaper to save more money. But I had a plan. I have always loved trucks, so I found a $1,000 trailer in good condition and bought it. It became my truck, my home on wheels. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living in it for much longer than I ever thought. Originally, I had hoped to stay with my parents in their house where my brother and his family still reside. But when I asked my parents if I could stay for a while, they said their house was full and they didn't want me there. Besides, we hadn't exactly gotten along in the last decade. They said they would only agree to let me park my trailer there if I paid a price that was basically the cost of renting an apartment in my area. It was too high just to park my trailer, and I was unemployed, trying to save as much money as possible until I found a new job. I might as well be living in an apartment with that rental price. My parents called my trailer a monstrosity, and it made me feel. They told me to go away since we couldn't reach an agreement, and my sister-in-law found it absolutely hilarious that I had to live in a trailer. My brother joined in, pointing and mocking me, calling me a bum. I parked my truck-trailer combo in a store parking lot to sleep on the first night when I had nowhere else to go. I was terrified that someone might try to break in. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. There was nowhere else I could go, as any other relatives with homes were far away, and all my friends lived in apartments, and I was too proud to impose on them. I also registered my mail at a friend's address. It was the only way for me to still receive my mail. Finding a stable place to park was quite challenging. I scouted around to try and find a job similar to my old one. I lived the life of a nomadic camper for months. During that time, I had to deal with a lot, from drug-addicted beggars to people demanding that I leave because my trailer was an eyesore. To have a constant supply of electricity, I learned to use a long extension cord. I had to connect it to an external power outlet of a random building while parked on a street. I know it's the wrong thing to do, but I had to keep my trailer batteries charged so that my refrigerator would stay cold. I had a small solar power bank to charge my phone, but I had nothing like a generator, and generators are noisy and require fuel anyway. So, I did what I had to do. After months of living like that, I finally landed a new job. I had to move to the neighboring town to find a job that wasn't in retail. I had worked in retail while in college, and I had promised myself I would never do it again. But I was almost ready to break that promise. I was still receiving unemployment benefits, but I didn't have a stable place to live while receiving them, and I didn't want to remain unemployed when it ran out. When I finally got a new job, I practically lived in the back of the building near the storage area in old employee parking spaces. Literally, no one else seemed to mind using them because they were so far back. It was almost a forgotten area. My boss, the owner of the company, actually liked it because I was available to work any shift as long as I got enough sleep. He even allowed me to detach the trailer from my truck and park it in one of the spaces so that I could drive without it. I'm not sure if it was legal, but no one bothered us about it during the entire time I lived there. I didn't have to deal with many intruders either. There were a few, but the security guards would chase them away. I was on duty almost all the time, and when they needed me, I worked practically every day of the week. My boss let me connect my trailer to the building for power and water, and I paid a small amount of rent by working for free on Sundays when no one else was in the office except for the janitor and security. Besides, I usually had to shower at a friend's apartment or at the local gym because the trailer didn't have a shower, only a portable toilet, and I didn't want to fill it up since emptying it is an unpleasant task. So, I used other bathrooms whenever I could. I had the key to the storage room and could go in to use the bathroom at any time, and I even talked to the night security guard and called him by his first name. Since then, he became one of my closest friends. The trailer was easy to heat in winter with a small electric heater, but summers were not fun. The trailer didn't have air conditioning. I worked many overtime hours and learned some new skills from other employees, and eventually, in the middle of this year, I got a better position in the company as a supervisor and started earning a higher salary than my previous job. That's when I decided that I wanted a house. The shock of losing my apartment made me realize that I needed something much more stable in the long run. I searched for something close to my work, and just 3 kilometers away, I found a 3-bedroom prefabricated house on a small property. Somehow, I managed to buy it for $10,000 less than the asking price. I used almost all of my savings as a down payment, and the mortgage loan was finally approved. I no longer needed to live in a trailer. There was enough space behind the house for me to park my truck and remove the trailer, so I placed it in the backyard in case I wanted to use it again. Once it was fully installed in the house, I was foolish enough to boast about it on my Facebook. My family saw the post, and that's where this shit really starts. After a few weeks, my parents, siblings, and their families came to visit me unannounced, wanting to tour my house. I hadn't even given them my address, so I still don't know how they found out where I live. None of my friends confessed to giving out my address, and no family member admitted to it either. No nome de John me pediu para falar en particular. Todo mundo saiu repentinamente de sala e se amonta na varanda de frente. That's when I finally realized that they had planned something. Let's call my brother John. Could clarify the situation for you. My brother, let's call him Dan for simplicity, said that the house was too much for me and that I should let him and his family live there because his wife is pregnant with their 4th child. He mentioned that my house is closer to his workplace and pointed out that I already have a trailer, so I could live in it while they occupy the main house. I want to emphasize that he never mentioned offering any rent. It's important to note that he has a good job. Furthermore, he started talking about changes and even a curfew, stating that I couldn't just come and go as I pleased without prior notice. If it weren't for the fact that I was speaking to my brother, I would have thought that the person I was talking to had gone crazy. But Dan has been acting irrational for a long time, thanks to our parents always treating him as if he were the center of the world. I tried to interject and share my opinion, but he continued talking over me as if I didn't have a say in the matter. There is no way I would rent out my house or parts of it to him or anyone else, maybe except for a valid and mutually agreed upon arrangement. I apologize for the situation you're going through. It seems like you are dealing with a difficult family dynamic, and I understand your frustration. It's important to assert your boundaries and make it clear that your house is your own and not available for others to live in without a proper agreement. Setting up your phone to record the conversation was a wise move to have evidence of the conversation. It's unfortunate that your brother, parents, and sister-in-law exhibit narcissistic behavior and are not respecting your autonomy. When your brother tried to act as if it was a done deal and reached out to shake your hand, it was good that you stood your ground and firmly declined. It's crucial to assert your rights as the homeowner and make it clear that their desires do not override your own. Remember, you have the right to decide who lives in your house and under what circumstances. Don't let anyone pressure you into making decisions that you're not comfortable with or that go against your own plans and needs. I'm sorry to hear that the situation escalated to such a confrontational point. It's important to stand your ground and assert your rights as the homeowner. Your brother's argument that he deserves a better place for his family to live doesn't justify him trying to take over your house without any compensation or agreement. It's concerning that your parents and sister-in-law joined in and tried to force you to agree with their demands. Remember, it's your decision and your right to determine what happens with your own property. During heated arguments, emotions can run high, and it's important to try to stay calm and assertive. If the situation becomes unbearable or you feel threatened, it may be necessary to seek support from legal authorities or a mediator to help resolve the conflict. Keep documenting any incidents or conversations that occur, as it can serve as evidence if you need it later. It's unfortunate that your family is not respecting your boundaries, but it's important to prioritize your own well-being and protect your rights as a homeowner. I'm sorry to hear about the physical altercation and the aggressive behavior from your sister-in-law. It's important to prioritize your safety and well-being in such situations. If you were physically assaulted, it is recommended to contact the police and report the incident. They can provide guidance on how to handle the situation and ensure your safety. It's unfortunate that your family members are not respecting your boundaries and behaving in such a manner. Remember, you have the right to decide who enters your property and how you want to live your life. It's understandable that you feel frustrated and upset with their actions. Given the circumstances, it may be beneficial for you to seek legal advice to understand your rights and options moving forward. A lawyer can provide guidance on how to handle the situation and protect your interests. Also, make sure to keep any evidence, such as the recordings on your phone, as it may be useful if legal actions need to be taken. Take care of yourself and surround yourself with supportive individuals who respect your boundaries. If she tries anything, it's important to follow through with your decision to file a complaint for assault. Documenting any incidents and gathering evidence, such as video recordings, can be helpful in supporting your case. It's good that you took preventive measures by sharing your story on social media and putting your profile on private. By doing so, you were able to present your side of the story and garner support from other family members. It's unfortunate that your family members may have been planning to distort the events and portray you as the villain. Having evidence to support your claims is crucial in such situations. It's important to stay strong and maintain your position, especially when it comes to protecting your home and your rights. Remember, it's your right to set boundaries and protect yourself from any form of mistreatment or manipulation. Surrounding yourself with supportive individuals who believe and stand by you can provide you with the necessary strength and reassurance during this challenging time. Consider seeking legal advice to understand your rights and options moving forward. A lawyer can guide you through the process and help protect your interests. That's understandable. It seems like your parents and your brother didn't put much effort into lying or distorting the truth. It's good to hear that there were some individuals who recognized their behavior and chose not to support them. It's unfortunate that someone called you and criticized you, but you handled it well by ending the call and blocking the number. As the week passed, it seems that your parents and Dan showed up at your doorstep as they had promised in their previous ultimatum. They rang the doorbell and banged on the door, but you had taken precautions by installing a door chain lock to prevent them from entering. It's important to prioritize your safety and security in such situations. Recording the interactions and being prepared to call the police if necessary can help protect your rights. It's positive that your mother intervened to calm the situation. However, it's crucial to continue asserting your boundaries and standing your ground. Remember to prioritize your well-being and protect yourself from any further attempts to invade your space or manipulate the situation. Consider reaching out to a legal professional for advice on how to handle the ongoing conflict and any potential legal actions that may be necessary to protect your rights and maintain your peace of mind. In a sickly sweet tone, she asked if I was ready to let my brother move in. I told her, and the rest of them, to screw off and never come back. My mother shed crocodile tears and asked me why I couldn't do this for Dan since he's my beloved brother. I laughed and told her straight up that I don't love him as a brother because he treated me like shit for years, and they encouraged it. They're terrible parents, and he's a terrible brother. So, I told them to leave or I would call the police. Surprisingly, they all left rather easily, if you don't count my mother's loud crying and the others giving me dirty looks. It seemed like getting them to leave was suspiciously easy. I thought all the mess was over, but I guess we should have taken it more seriously because they had other stupid plans. I came back home later that week on Friday night and found a moving van and my brother's minivan parked in my driveway. It was Dan and his family moving things in, and he just smirked at me as he signed for it. When I saw him, I became furious and told him, as well as the rest of his family, to stop. But my sister-in-law told me, in a mocking tone, that it was all legal and they had the right to move in. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were actually trying to invade my home without my consent. I threatened to call the police, but they just laughed and said they had planned everything with our parents. I couldn't comprehend the audacity of their actions. It was clear that they were determined to undermine my ownership of the house and disregard my boundaries. Presumptuously that whether I liked it or not, they were moving in. Then, in the most fake way, she tilted her head and pursed her lips, saying it was okay because my mother allowed it, and I should always listen to what my mother tells me. I boiled with anger just hearing those words and looking at her face. I locked myself in my truck to call the police immediately, and when they realized what I was doing, my sister-in-law started banging on my window and yelling at me to stop, saying I couldn't do this to her because they didn't need the house. She threatened to break the side of my truck unless I stopped calling the police, and all of this was heard by the operator thanks to my slightly open window. I told my sister-in-law that if she damaged my truck, I would sue her, and she was smart enough to back off when the police arrived. Dan, my sister-in-law, and their children locked themselves inside my house. I told the police what had happened and showed them my new driver's license with my current address. When we approached the front door, I saw that they had changed the lock, and the old lock was on the porch with the center drilled out. The drill they had used was right there, next to her with a complete set of drill bits. Could they be any more foolish, leaving such evidence behind? I pointed out the broken lock and the drill to the police and gave them a summary of all the events that had taken place prior. Well, I guess Dan must have called our parents at some point after I arrived home because they showed up while I was talking to the police. My parents immediately lied and started saying that I had agreed to rent my house to my brother and his family. I told them that was a lie and easily demonstrated it in several ways. Then, my sister-in-law finally exited my house with some papers in hand. They both looked super smug, as if they had somehow fooled me. In reality, they had printed out a fake rental agreement, but my signature wasn't on it. There was a signature, but it didn't resemble mine in any way. I guess none of them had ever seen my signature, so that was incredibly foolish on their part. I told my parents and Adam that it was a very obvious fraud, and if the police were to investigate, they would easily discover it. I also mentioned that going to jail and court wouldn't do them any good. It could even result in them losing their jobs, which is their only means of supporting their family. I told them that I would seek legal representation and file a lawsuit for damages if anything of mine was lost, stolen, or broken. And I would also call Child Protective Services. Dan turned pale and looked very scared when I said all of this, but my mother intervened and went back to hammering that nonsense, saying that I should do this for Dan and live in the damn trailer so they can finally have a home of their own. I screamed back, telling her that if she thought it was such a great idea, she could do the same for Dan and let him have her house all to himself. The police officers separated my mother from me, and I stated that I wanted all of them out now or I would file a complaint. I shouted about how they drilled the lock on my front door to break in, how the rental papers were obviously fake, how poorly they forged my signature, and how I had recorded a video of my sister-in-law attacking me. These are crimes that I could ruin their lives with if I wanted to. And if they didn't leave, that's exactly what I would do. The only reason I hadn't done it already was because of Dan's children, so they still had a chance to get out. When my parents heard this, I think they finally realized they couldn't force me to give the house to Dan. My mother gave in and said she would. With my sister-in-law and spoke to her in a low voice for a minute while my father talked to Dan. My sister-in-law instantly started crying loudly and tore the fake rental papers into tiny pieces, throwing them around like confetti, only to be reprimanded by a police officer to pick up the paper scraps or they would be fined for littering. Both police officers at this point had a look of disbelief on their faces, as if they couldn't believe the audacity. They instructed my sister-in-law and her family to gather their belongings back into the moving truck. The children were all crying, and the eldest was sobbing because he wouldn't have his own room anymore. My sister-in-law gathered her children in a pathetic last-ditch attempt to blame me for this sad spectacle, you know, where everyone huddles together in a kind of group hug while all looking in one direction. I swear, I even think they rehearsed it beforehand. All the children had the same pleading look on their faces, mouths quivering. My sister-in-law rubbed her pregnant belly and tilted her head to look like a sad puppy, and my brother put on the saddest face he could muster and said, "Please, don't do this. We need a place to live." Place and said they needed to leave immediately. My parents and sister-in-law intensified their crying to level 11 and my sister-in-law shouted at me, "Are you satisfied now? You've denied us a home because you're too selfish to share and help the family." I ended up laughing maniacally and retorted that what he was trying to do was steal, not share, and no amount of crying would make me let his family move in because he was no longer my brother, he was just a jerk who thought he could take whatever he wanted from me, just like when we were kids. Dan started bombarding me with insults until the police told him to calm down or he would be handcuffed. Regardless of whether I wanted to press charges or not, he bit his lip and looked a mix of fear and extreme irritation. I asked the police if they could stay until my parents, brother, and sister-in-law left, and they said they had no intention of going anywhere until this was resolved. In fact, within minutes, 2 more police officers arrived, making a total of 4, as backup. This gave my parents an extra incentive to move. I made them give me the keys to the new place, and they reluctantly handed them over. I decided to put another lock on my front door to replace the one he had installed, as I didn't know if he had copies of the keys or not. He was very reluctant to hand them over to me. Instead of giving them to me, he threw them into the street, into a sewer drain, and told me to go get them myself. One of the police officers scolded him for that and made him retrieve the keys. He had to pull up the grate to reach them and ended up getting dirty in the process. When he handed the keys back to me, he just grumbled and tossed them into my hand. I told everyone to leave and never come back. My mother threatened to disinherit me as if it were some kind of threat, and I expressed to them how little that meant to me. In an excessively sarcastic manner, I said something like, "Oh no, does that mean I won't be able to go on vacations with you, where I'm always treated like garbage by all of you anyway because Dan has always been your favorite? You treated me so poorly when I was a child that if you ever needed an organ donor, I wouldn't give him anything. So go ahead and do what you always told me to do when I was mistreated by all of you and cry about it." My parents were shocked after I said all that, and the quartet of police officers seemed quite amused, seeing unpleasant parents like mine put in their place in front of the police. Because they probably won't try anything foolish. My mother started crying and walked away, while my father stood there looking like he wanted to hit me but just held on to his defeated children. My sister-in-law was having a rage attack on the front lawn, but soon they all formed a line, distributing boxes and removing their belongings from my house. Nothing had been unpacked yet, so everything was taken out very quickly. However, as they were doing this, my mother kept saying it wasn't too late and that I could still do this for Dan, repeatedly trying to bargain more and more to try to change my mind. She said she couldn't afford to pay me rent if I let them stay, and when that didn't work, she suggested I move back in with them to let Dan have my house so that I wouldn't have to share the house. I told her to shut up and keep packing boxes because I don't want her family around, I don't want his money, and I certainly don't want to live with him or my parents ever again after the way they treated me as a child. Making a deal with my parents would be like making a deal with the devil. My sister-in-law ended up having another outburst. After hearing that, my sister-in-law threw a box on the ground and then sat down, putting on a pity act because she didn't want to go back to sharing a house with my parents. She just sat there with an angry and sad expression until everyone finished, and she didn't even want to get up when it was time to leave. They finally took everything out of the house and loaded it onto the truck. Before they left, I confronted my parents one last time about all the things they put me through when I was younger. With 4 police officers right there, they couldn't do much besides stand and wait, for once in their lives, for the consequences of their actions. I even pointed out how they simply couldn't do anything good for me, like letting me stay in my trailer when I was homeless and trying to get back on my feet, or how they allowed my sister-in-law to ridicule and call me a bum. Who's the bum now? They wanted to kick me out of my own house so that I couldn't stay there for free. But when I needed a place to stay, they wanted to take more from me than I had just to park my trailer, knowing that I was unemployed. There were extremely critical looks from the police officers as I said all of this. Then I asked them, what have I done other than being born into this? I don't deserve to be treated so poorly just because I finally have a little bit of success in life. They want to take it away from me and give it to their favorite son, so he can have everything while I have nothing. I bought my house with the money I earned. I don't owe them anything, and I will never ask them for anything again because it's clear that I'll never be anything more than a doormat or a cash cow in their eyes. I didn't get any responses from them. They just stood there like fish out of water. So I continued complaining and asked them what made them think they were such great parents after all of this. My father turned beet red, but more out of shame than anger this time, and my mother was crying, saying she was a horrible person. I agreed without hesitation that she is a horrible person. They all are. They were horrible people, and everyone knew it. But if I were to say all these things privately instead of in public, they would get mad at me and still act as if I were wrong. They've been denying it for so long that it has become a part of who they are. My mother buried her face in my father's jacket to cry, and my father looked more defeated than ever. Not even their family could defend their actions anymore. They completely avoided me while finishing up loading everything back into the moving truck. I made sure that nothing of mine was stolen, not that I had much furniture at the time. I was fortunate to have a sofa. They all went back to their vehicles, and my sister-in-law just stood there staring at me like Alice until my brother finally got her to drive the minivan home. As soon as they were all gone, I turned on my internet and shared what had happened. My parents were too ashamed to even try to defend their actions this time, although the family was somewhat divided before this incident. Now it was an overwhelming victory in my favor. Almost the entire family sided with me after this incident, and those who didn't simply didn't take sides. It didn't matter how much my parents had previously tried to say that we were doing it for Dan, no one else listened to them. So, any remaining family support they had was now gone. Many of the family members I expected would not take my side actually did, including those who used to be sycophants. They finally got tired, and at that time, I offered to host half of the family for the next Christmas in my new house, and my parents weren't invited. Surprisingly, I wasn't blocked on my brother's and sister-in-law's profiles, and I saw that my sister-in-law had her 4th baby in early November. They are still living with my parents, and I'm sure they knew I was snooping because my sister-in-law kept making passive-aggressive posts every couple of weeks about not having enough space while living with my parents, probably to see if she can still blame me. And I'm sure it's putting my mother and father against the wall because they're not getting any peace and quiet in their old age with 3 detestable and unruly children, 1 mentally stable sister-in-law, my golden boy brother, and a newborn baby all at once. Maybe they could move into a trailer in their own backyard and let Dan take over their house completely. Then they might have some peace. Yes, they could do that for once. I was trying to keep it in 2 posts, but I realized as I compiled everything that part 2 was. Part 3. It's been split into part 3 for those who commented, suggesting I get cameras. I'll get them when I can afford it. I'm still recovering financially from buying a house last year. And as far as I know, good cameras require a decent computer for recording, and I only have a 3-year-old laptop with Windows 10. Yes, I'm aware of doorbell cameras, and that will be the first type I'll get for those who kept saying I should have had my brother and sister-in-law arrested. The only reason I didn't do that was because they are parents, and their children need them. If they were arrested, my brother would probably lose his job, and without it, their family wouldn't have any money. Plus, my sister-in-law has a baby who is only a few months old. None of them need to end up in jail, but revenge doesn't require imprisonment. The police can help, yes, but I managed to get revenge without filing a police report. Would I be as merciful again? Probably not, and they know that. I decided to wait until after the new year to make a countermove in case more things happened, and they did. As previous readers know, my sister-in-law was making passive-aggressive posts on social media that where I timidly admitted that I was too attached to living here. I had my best job opportunities in this area. My hometown doesn't offer many job prospects in my field, if any at all. I wanted to do things my way as much as possible, and that was a response they accepted. Overall, we ended up having a quite enjoyable party, one of the happiest in years. Some relatives even brought Christmas CDs. I have to say, my favorite was the one my uncle brought from King Charles. It was a great and joyful celebration. For the first time, I felt like I could just forget about my past problems and enjoy the moment. But I wouldn't be writing this if it had continued that way. After about 2 hours into the party, you know who showed up: my parents, brother, and sister-in-law. They tried to appear happy, didn't even knock, just walked right through my front door as if they were meant to be there. I turned off the music and told them to leave. Immediately, they begged to stay and said they brought gifts. One of my uncles stood up and yelled at them before I had another chance to speak. He said they didn't deserve to be in my house or in my life after what they had tried to do months before, and he was supported by several other relatives. You see, this guy is my mother's brother, and he used to side with them until he found out about everything that happened between me and my parents, and even my grandparents, my mother's parents, quickly intervened. They told my parents that if they want to reconcile with me, it's still too early, and they have never been so disappointed in them as they were last year. They had been hiding their favoritism towards my brother for a long time, but no one was fooled anymore, and they needed to make an effort and try to treat me as their own child if they wanted to be in my life again. Then they turned to my sister-in-law and told her they were tired of her repetitive nonsense posts, and to just let it go. My house will not become their new home. My sister-in-law resorted to her old tactic of crying and put on a show, saying she should be living here, not me. She threw herself into a chair and had a rage fit, saying it wasn't fair for me to have this house when I don't even have my own family, and she has 4 children who need more space. She just wanted a better place to date and feel like a real mother. It was petty of me, but I loudly pointed out that she is a terrible mother because she makes my mother take care of her kids while she sits around all day drinking, playing with her phone, or going out and spending all of Dan's money. And she has the audacity to complain about it. I even joked that I'm surprised her baby isn't getting drunk from her breast milk with how much she drinks. I admit it went a little too far, as I received some looks. My sister-in-law demanded to know if I was calling her a bad mother. I said that the evidence speaks for itself. And if she wants a chance to move out of my parents' house someday, she needs to put her university degree to use, get a job, and learn to save money. Anyway, my mother already takes care of most of my brother's kids, so she would have plenty of time once her baby grows a little older. My brother's 7-year-old eldest son ran up to me and started kicking and screaming at me for yelling at his mother. He kept saying that his mom told him I was the mean guy who made her cry and wouldn't let them live here. That's when my brother grabbed his son to pull him away, but all the other relatives jumped into the conversation, and it kind of turned into a family intervention against my sister-in-law and my brother. She was crying, her new baby was crying, her other kids were crying, and even Dante was almost in tears from the verbal lashing he was receiving. He ended up sitting on the shoe ottoman near the front door, looking like a complete mess. He couldn't look anyone in the eye or even utter a word to me, not with a whole house full of angry people ready to judge him if he tried to unleash his spoiled child self again. If they hadn't been there to interfere, I bet he would have resorted to the same tactics he tried when he attempted to take my house months before. At this point, though, he had been so thoroughly humiliated that his reputation with my parents and the rest of the family was completely shattered, as the masks had been torn off. Afterwards, my parents, brother, and sister-in-law left in defeat, and the party resumed. We all avoided discussing what had happened for the rest of the night. Since most of the adults had been drinking, everyone spent the night at my house. I even let some of them sleep in the trailer to ensure there was enough space. I must admit, it also makes for a nice guest house. Earlier, all my relatives wanted a tour, and they couldn't believe I had been living there for about 2 years. I received many questions about how it was in the summer and winter, and so on. I woke up earlier than everyone on Christmas morning and made a fresh pot of coffee and some ibuprofen for those who had a hangover. I was praised for being a much better host than my parents had ever been, and we all agreed to repeat the experience next Christmas. After Christmas, my sister-in-law finally stopped making posts that were obviously directed at me and deleted all the old ones as well. But shortly after the new year, she made a new post complaining that she tried to convince my parents to buy a trailer for themselves, just like me, so they could set it up in the backyard and have the house to themselves. It's a taste of their own medicine, which can be quite amusing. However, my parents vehemently rejected the idea. From what I saw, no one is going to help them out of their own house, let alone their bedroom. The post remained online for only a few days before my sister-in-law removed it, and she has hardly posted anything since then. She loves to complain, but if a tree falls and no one is around to hear it, can she still complain? I think she realized it's futile because no one is listening anymore, and she still can't afford to move her family on her own with her salary anytime soon. If they end up having another child in the coming years, I won't be surprised. Things have calmed down for me since then, and I even invited some friends over for a poker night. I'm terrible at poker because I can never remember how to play, but it doesn't matter. We can drink beer, eat junk food, and have a good time. I think maybe in the summer, I can consider dating someone. Time is passing, and we're only getting older. Fingers crossed that everything works out. My trailer is parked in my backyard now, and I admit there have been days where I've just gone there to pass the time. I lived in it for 2 years, it's like my second home. Maybe one day, I'll actually be able to use it for camping as it should be. I've never been camping before. My parents considered it a waste of time, so it would be a completely new experience for me. This pretty much marks the end of what happened. My parents, brother, and sister-in-law have been keeping their distance from me. In fact, they seem to be acting as if I don't exist, just like they did before I bought a house. Not that it bothers me, it's better this way. But inevitably, they will come back in some form. I know they will. I just wonder what kind of foolishness they'll do next if something notable like all of this happens again. I'll make another post if this account is still active. Part 4. It all started when my parents recently contacted me through social media and asked for a meeting in a public place of my choice. It screamed trap, but I wasn't afraid. In fact, I was curious to see what they had to say. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop, and when the day came, I arrived early, prepared for anything. I ordered a coffee and sat at a table near the entrance, keeping an eye out for their arrival. After a few minutes, I saw them walking in, looking somewhat nervous. We exchanged brief greetings, and then my father began speaking. He apologized for everything that had happened, acknowledging their favoritism and mistreatment towards me. My mother chimed in, expressing her regret and admitting that they had let their emotions cloud their judgment. They explained that they had been reflecting on their actions and the consequences it had on our relationship. They realized how much they had hurt me and how they had driven a wedge between us. They genuinely wanted to make amends and rebuild our family bonds. I listened to their words, trying to gauge their sincerity. It was hard to trust them again after everything that had happened, but I could sense a genuine remorse in their voices and see it in their eyes. They seemed genuinely committed to change. We spent hours talking, discussing our past, and addressing the issues that had caused so much pain. It was a cathartic experience, allowing us to finally open up and express our feelings. Tears were shed, but also moments of laughter and understanding. At the end of the meeting, we didn't have all the answers or a complete resolution, but we had taken the first step towards healing. They apologized again, promising to work on themselves and our relationship. Since that day, we have been slowly rebuilding our family bonds. It's a process that takes time and effort from all parties involved, but it's worth it. We are making progress, learning to communicate better, and trying to understand each other's perspectives. As for my brother and sister-in-law, they have kept their distance. I haven't heard from them since that tumultuous incident during the Christmas party. I'm not sure if they will ever reach out or if they will continue to stay apart. Only time will tell. For now, I'm focusing on my own life, enjoying the newfound peace and working on personal growth. The wounds are still healing, but I'm optimistic about the future. And so, this marks the end of my story, or at least a significant chapter of it. Life is unpredictable, and who knows what the future holds. But I was having fun. They knew better than to mess with me anymore, so I couldn't help but wonder what they wanted this time. I chose a local restaurant, and we met there. Dan was with them, but he mostly kept quiet. We exchanged awkward greetings, ordered some drinks, and got straight to the point. My parents begged me to help them get their own apartment so that they could finally move out. Apparently, they were asking me to provide some capital or guarantee the apartment and help with the rent. I simply said no to both requests. That's when Dan angrily spoke up and shouted at me, saying that I have so much and don't have a family to support like he does. He needed my help, and I should save money for his family since I don't have one. I laughed and asked where they were when I needed their help. I reminded them of the times they pointed and laughed at me for being homeless or even further back to my childhood. I would have loved to delve into that with so many years around to listen. My mother grabbed my hand and begged me not to talk about any of that. My father just averted his gaze and didn't say anything. I'm sure they wanted to say something, but they knew it wouldn't change my mind. I made it clear that I wouldn't be helping them, and that was the end of it. We finished our meal in an uncomfortable silence, and as we left the restaurant, we went our separate ways. It was a sobering reminder of the strained relationship we had and the deep-seated issues that still lingered. From that day on, I continued to focus on my own life and building a future for myself. I realized that I couldn't rely on my parents or expect them to change. I had to be self-sufficient and create my own path. I haven't heard from them since that encounter, and I don't know if we will ever reconcile or if they will ever truly understand the pain they caused. But I've come to accept that sometimes, family isn't about blood ties but rather the relationships we choose and nurture. I'm grateful for the lessons I've learned and the strength I've gained through these experiences. I'm determined to create a better future for myself, filled with genuine connections and a sense of belonging. And as for my parents, well, they will have to find their own way, just as I have. They looked at me like deer caught in headlights when I asked them if they thought I was rich or something. I explained to them that I didn't have that much money. I talked about how much I had to save to afford the down payment for my house and how I had to work hard to save that much money quickly. I also mentioned that I had spent almost all of it on the down payment and I was still in the process of recovering financially. Yes, I had a decent monthly income, but most of it went straight into my savings. I asked Adam about his annual salary, and when he told me, I pointed out that it was actually slightly higher than mine. Then, in front of my parents, I did some rough math, explaining that about 70% of my income goes towards my mortgage, insurance, gas, internet, phone, food, and other bills. So, at most, I have around 30% left that I can put into savings, and I have to make sure that the saved money recovers in time. I also have to ensure that I have savings for emergencies. My truck is from the 90s, and if it breaks down, would need money to fix or replace it. There are other expenses that would require a financial cushion as well. I wanted them to understand that despite having a stable income, I had financial responsibilities and limited resources. It wasn't as simple as them assuming I had plenty of money to spare. I think it was an eye-opener for them to see the practical realities of managing finances and the challenges I faced. I wanted them to realize that I couldn't just help them out without considering my own financial stability. It was important for them to understand that I had worked hard to get where I was, and I had to prioritize my own financial well-being. Home repairs, taxes, lawyers, or any other unexpected expenses. As you can see, I can't save money for Dan, and I also refuse to sign anything that would leave me responsible for any bills he couldn't or wouldn't pay. I pointed out that this is probably why my parents haven't collected on the lady's apartment for a long time. My mother started crying again. I was basically one step ahead of them in all of this. I'm not an ATM, and I'm not a fool, and I stated that right to their faces. I hoped my father would get angry at me as he always does, but this time he didn't. I'm used to this man exploding at the slightest provocation throughout my entire life, but this time he simply didn't. There wasn't even a smirk of disdain on his face. The only way I could describe the look he had was one of regret and defeat. Maybe he regretted being a shitty father, or maybe he regretted that he could no longer intimidate me. Who knows? Either way, my parents couldn't argue with me, and I wasn't going to give them money. They just got up and said it was all a waste of time, and he was leaving. My mother apologized for him, but he still wanted to go. So, just to kill them with kindness, I offered to pay for an unlimited soup and salad buffet. Since we were all there, they couldn't refuse free food, as we hadn't ordered anything besides drinks. They stayed, and I made an effort to talk about anything other than money. Dan remained quiet, either eating his food or looking at his phone. But my parents actually talked and the meal was over. Dan left $10 on the table as a tip and walked out without saying another word to me or anyone. My mother apologized for his behavior, and we all went our separate ways. That was it. It wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be, but it was still much better than it used to be. As for my sister-in-law, well, she has been regularly complaining on the internet about my parents. She really doesn't seem to like the fact that she's not the queen bee of their house, and I think her toxicity is finally affecting them. Why else would they be so desperate to come to me for help? My sister-in-law is really pushing for my parents to move into a trailer like I did to make space in the house. She seems to have some followers who think the same way, because every now and then I receive messages from strangers scolding me for not giving my house to my sister-in-law. I don't bother arguing with these people anymore, I just block them and move on. Although there was a persistent troll who had my phone number and would call from a different number each time. It seems to be the same person who called to tell me that I should make room for a real family man like Dan, but I couldn't care less about the calls. However, they seem to have decreased or stopped altogether because I made it clear to that person that they were just amusing themselves by keeping it up for so long. The last time they called was at the beginning of the month, and I haven't heard anything since then. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Keep watching.